Greetings and welcome back to Community Centered, where we are exploring a series we've titled The Lost Art of Friendship. In this series, we're going to take a deeper look at the skill sets necessary for making new friends and maintaining friendships. Because we live in an increasingly isolated world where technology rules our days, and some generations, such as Gen Z, may have never even learned the skill set necessary to thrive in a social setting. Frankly, I'm a millennial and I think my generation could use a little brush up on these skills as well. I'm Ellie Whittekins, and if there's one thing I have learned in my past, 5+ years of making new friends and building a community for myself, it's that small talk is inescapable. I know, a lot of people hate small talk. I read a lot of hate about it online. A lot of people want to get into the deeper and more meaningful conversations with people. They don't want to spend their time talking about the small things, the weather, or, little bits and bobs of what people have going on in their lives and never getting into that deep conversation about philosophy and life and the troubles that we are having. I mean, honestly, small talk is so hated that I am prepared for this to be one of my least watched videos. But it is inescapable, and if we're talking about skill sets necessary for navigating a social setting, you need to be able to navigate small talk. Now, in our last video in this series, we talked about making an introduction, how to introduce yourself to someone new. Now, that was an obvious first step. The next part of it is automatically small talk. Just think about it. You almost never see someone go up to someone, give them their name, and then start talking about their parents' divorce and how it affected them as a child. Or no one's come up to you and said hello and then told you all about the results of the test the doctor took last week. Or, heaven forbid, someone walk up and automatically start sharing their very strong opinions of what a foreign political power has done without so much as a how do you do. Or, I don't know, maybe that one's become more common, but it shouldn't. That's the thing with small talk, is that they are safe conversations that you can have in a social setting without necessarily like making someone look at you like you're crazy. Because in all three of those situations, I think we would all look at the other person and think they are crazy for being a stranger just all of a sudden telling us these things. No, we like people to approach us like a normal person, tell us their name, and ask little questions, and for us to have this conversation of little questions back and forth. Now, if I can make one more plea about how important small talk is, small talk actually does something for you. When you are in a conversation with a new person, it gives you time to figure out if that person is really friendship material. I have met so many people over the last 5 years where when I first met them, I'm thinking, yes, we can absolutely be friends. I like this person. I think we have a good vibe, good banter going. I like this. And then over the course of 6 months, I realized, oh, this person is way more drama than I want in my life. And luckily, because I gave small talk the due that it needed, I never moved that person into the friendship category. Because once you kind of become friends with someone and then you think, maybe not, it's much harder to move them out of there. If I had done that, that would have caused far more drama in my life than I needed. As I stated before, I don't need that kind of drama in my life. But no, because I kept the rule of keeping small talk with people, I still had them in that acquaintanceship category, and I was fine keeping them there. They didn't need to know any additional details about my life. They didn't need to be any sort of close friends to me. So that is what small talk does. It is certainly inescapable, but it is also really important because it gives you time to really assess who you want to let in on a deeper level. Now that we've covered that, let's go over some basics. Small talk is all about being approachable and learning about the other person. So you want to stay on those nice, safe topics, but you will also be going back and forth, answering and asking questions to them in order to learn a little bit more about them. They get to learn a little bit more about you, and everyone gets to display that they're normal and they understand proper etiquette by not wandering off into crazy land while in a conversation. So let's go through a couple of scenarios and what those safe, normal topics would be. So picking up from my last video of being at a career networking type event where you are talking to other people in or kind of adjacent to your own industry. In those cases, you can very much ask them what it is they do for a company, where they studied or what they studied in school, and what maybe brought them out to this area. Those are all very safe topics, all kind of focusing around work or schooling adjacent to work, right? Um, and kind of go through and explore those topics. Now, for the most part, I would say at a networking event, you want to kind of stick to those topics. Someone might, in conversation, mention a hobby that they have, or their wife and kids, or somewhere where they grew up. In that case, you can always ask follow up questions on those, but I wouldn't straight up ask someone at a networking event, oh, where'd you grow up? It's kind of just out of the zone of normal because you're really there to kind of talk about work and get to know people in the industry more. It's not necessarily a social gathering in the sense of something like church or book club might be a social gathering. And we're getting to those next. So at book club, a lot of times the questions are book related to begin with. So when someone new walks into our book club, and keep in mind, my book club has been going for about 12 years now, so there's a lot of us that have had established relationships. So someone's really walking into a group of ladies that know each other pretty well. And I can understand that being nerve-wracking to someone. If you didn't watch my last video, I mentioned that I specifically found a book club that had only been meeting at the time for like 1 or 2 meetings before I joined it, because I did not want to walk in to a group that was well established. But anyways, in book club, when someone new comes in and, takes a seat with us, and usually someone near them, if it's me, usually ask them some questions about the book. Like, did you enjoy the book? Obviously, we'll get to like deeper questions in book club, but ask them if they enjoyed the book or what brought them to book club. Maybe if they joined a book club before, what type of books they like to read, and if they had any suggestions in that genre. If it happens to be a genre that I also read, then we have a really good ability to have a deep conversation there on like, what books have you read this? What did you think of this one? All that kind of stuff. So book club, starting out, once again, you start on topic. Now, whenever we have new people join our group, our leader will do a round of introductions. So the leader will start and she will explain, kind of what her goal was in starting a book club, talk about like, where she works, and then like her husband and child status, just kind of like little introductory questions. And then we'll go to the next lady and she'll talk about maybe, I joined book club because I wanted to meet new people in the area. I live, in such and such town. I'm married or I'm divorced or I've never been married, and then whether she has kids or grandkids. So, and then it just goes around the table and eventually the new person introduces themselves as well. And that is another part of small talk, is you also have to be prepared to answer some of these questions. But that's okay, because they're only going to be nice, normal questions. That is the point of small talk. They're going to be nice, normal questions that anyone can be prepared to answer and should know the answer to it, right? You should know your name, you should know your age, you should know in what town you live, though I certainly understand. I get words lost in my head all the time, so I understand if you sit there, you're like, deer in headlights, I know the answer to this question, but I'm having a hard time forming words. That happens, and that is perfectly okay. Usually someone will either help you out or, distract you with another question, which maybe will get your brain firing. It happens, and no one is ever really rude about it. Most people just find it relatable. It really is relatable. So that's a little bit like book club wise. That's what we get into. And in terms of like the personal chat section of it, usually we're only doing personal, independent free chat for a little bit. Once we get going, once again, our leader has questions on the book itself, and she'll propose those questions to the group. Propose a question, and whoever has an opinion about it will start talking. And different people, we just kind of share the conversation. Shy people don't need to talk if they don't want to. More extroverted people do a lot of talking. It's really good. And it's not something to be too afraid of. Once again, that is the point of any sort of small talk, is that it should be easy and approachable. Then you go on to something like church. And church is a little bit different. Unlike social networking and book club, where the questions are kind of themed around that, for the most part in church, we don't really talk about the sermon. We don't think about the sermon we're about to hear or talk about the sermon that we just heard. If there is a church related question, the question asked is usually, oh, how long have you been attending here? If you're new to a church, you could definitely say, you could definitely ask someone in a conversation like, I'm new here. What's one of your favorite things about this church? Or is there anything you think I need to get involved with? Those would be interesting starter questions. People also, in addition to asking like how long I've attended there, a lot of times they also ask me if I'm a part of a small group. So those are maybe the church related questions. For the most part, at church, the questions that I pose or someone poses to me are more life questions. Once again, where you work, possibly where you live, usually not too much, not unless it comes up, but like usually where you work, what you do for a living, if you're married, if you have kids, if you have grandkids, those are usually the ones that come up the most. And I would say in conversation, it is a good thing if you have an opportunity to do so to in your answer bring up other topics. So if I mention that I have a knitting club, a lot of times that opens up questions to the other person, and they will ask me questions about knitting, about my knitting group, about whether or not I'm part of the knitting group at church. The answer is no. It meets on a Thursday afternoon when I'm at work. It's amazing how many people ask me that question, but it's about having those conversations and giving them a little bit of room to ask you a question and back and forth. You will sometimes get awkward silences. I got an awkward silence today at church with someone that I probably haven't spoken to in a few weeks, and it was right near the beginning of the conversation. I had nothing. I had nothing prepared. And sometimes that's where those really great moments of having these questions prepared comes in handy, because it's like, okay, don't panic. You have a question prepared. Go for it, which is what I would recommend anyone who's looking to get into making friends and having these conversations. Just memorize like a list of 5 to 6 questions that you can ask, and hopefully one of those will come in handy. If you're talking to someone who is more used to being in a social setting, a lot of times they will come to your rescue, and that's what happened today. I honestly didn't have a question and couldn't think of anything. Once again, a lot of these people are people that I've spoken to before, so it's weird to pull out a very early on introduction question. And she asked me a question about going out to brunch today, because a group of them go out to brunch, and kind of saved me in that situation where we shared some awkward glances of like, okay, who's speaking next, and she saved the day with that. Another common conversation that I have at church, and I think this is maybe the cliche small talk topic, but I'm telling you, I have at least one conversation about it a week, and that's the weather. I know, a lot of people are like, oh no, not the weather conversation. There's never really anything interesting to say. But quite frankly, it's just so easy to do, because you walk up and you say hi to someone. How are you this week? Maybe they're not someone you've spoken to before. A lot of times, like our greeting desk at church, they have like name tags there, and they usually have someone at the table. So as you're getting your name tag, you say hi to the person, and they ask, how are you? I'm like, and it's usually, well, I'd be good, but I'm ready for winter to end. I don't know about, it just snowed last night. It was like 50 degrees yesterday, no snow in sight, and then it snowed in the middle of the night for church this morning. I had to clear off my car. It's all snowy again. I wasn't happy about it. No one in my state is happy about it. And that's, 6 months of the year we're complaining about winter. 6 months of the year, we're happy that it's summer and the sun is shining. And those are comments that we make when we say hi to a person that we don't really typically have a lot of conversation with. We don't have something to automatically go to. And that's going to be another video in this series, is going to be the follow-up questions of, okay, you've met this person and you've had the initial conversation of small talk. How do we work through follow-up questions on secondary and third conversations later down the line? Well, sometimes you're talking to someone that you don't really have real first conversations where you can or even want to have secondary and third questions. They're just someone that, said hi to you and asked how you are, and now you're just having this little conversation before you can wander off. That's what we do sometimes at the name tag desk. Quite frequently we talk about weather. It's a thing that happens. You're gonna have to accept it if you want to be in a social setting. You're gonna have to talk about the weather sometimes, or you're gonna have to hear other people talk about the weather. It just be nice about it. You can either be a curmudgeon about it and hate the weather small talk, or you can just accept that this is a part of the stepping stones to getting to deeper friendships and deeper conversations. So, one last situation I want to cover. And so far, in terms of small talk, and this is a general rule about small talk, is that you go back and forth. And that's what I've covered so far. You're going to be going back and forth. Here are the questions you ask. Be prepared to answer the same questions. Sometimes you're the one kind of getting peppered with questions, which was my experience when I first joined my knitting group. When I first met them, asked if I could join, and they welcomed me in, they proceeded to ask me just about all of the life questions I have mentioned in here. And they just kind of kept going with them. I don't want to say like they peppered me or they just kind of like overwhelmed me with them, but I am aware that in that first meeting, they pretty much asked the questions and I answered them, and there wasn't really any opportunity to do much else for me. There wasn't a lot of opportunity, much gaps for me to ask them questions about their lives. Now, I meet with my knitting group every weekend for, I want to say it's been a good 3.5 years now. So I've obviously had other opportunities. Once I saw them the second time, I had opportunities to ask them those questions in return. But it definitely wasn't something I was expecting at the time, to basically be sitting there for nearly 2 hours, almost in an interview. I mean, it wasn't quite as serious as an interview, and luckily we were all focusing on our knitting, so we it was maybe a little low key. You're not like forced to make eye contact with someone the whole time, which I don't do well with eye contact, but you didn't have that sort of a situation going. So it was okay. I didn't have any issues with it. And this was later in my journey of building community. So I had already built up some of those muscles of being able to answer these questions. I am mostly just sharing this because I think it's kind of a funny story, but also because sometimes you have to be prepared that maybe the other person might be a little eager in asking you questions. And that's why I say you really need to be prepared of like, what are your answers to your life questions? Now, all of the questions, like I said, should be easy, right? We should know how old we are, where we live, what we studied in school, all those sort of things, how many siblings we have. But sometimes those questions might be a little tricky for us. And it's helpful beforehand to know how you're going to answer those. For example, I have one blood related sibling, but I have two step siblings. Well, in my mind, I have three siblings, right? And it gets to the question of how do you explain that? Especially in terms of my knitting group, once again, I see them every week. And my step siblings came into my life when I was actually an adult, not when I was a child. I didn't grow up with them. So it's the matter of how do you explain to them in a reasonable way exactly what this situation is, so that way they have understanding that they need. It's more complicated than the question generally is, right? Most people, especially I tend to get this asked to me by older people. I hang out with a lot of people who are a good 3 decades older than me. So they may not have a lot of personal experience themselves with having step siblings and having to answer that question in a way that makes sense. If I'm going to be sharing, commentary of or a story later on of, my family going on a vacation, they need to understand only one of my siblings was there because the other two were not a part of my life yet. So the question of how many siblings you have is really a question I needed to answer in my head before I even met them, before I'm actually in that situation of having to answer that question. So when thinking about these questions, you're not just coming up with questions to ask someone else. You should also be aware of and think about how you're going to answer them, especially if maybe they're more complicated. What's the easiest way to explain it? And in which way do you need to explain it? So that would be my advice there. I hope this video is helpful to you on your journey to making connections and friends. If you have a question, please leave them in the comments below and join me here next time for further discussion on how to build your community here and now.